Good to go. Thanks. Welcome back to Synod Education. Mr. James, we had left you with a couple questions yesterday.
I remember one.
Yeah, well, one question. And so we dragged you all the way back for this one question, if you wouldn't mind reminding us of that question and then helping us out related to CTEs.
I'll be happy to answer any questions that I might have forgotten about or fine. So Brad James, Agency of Education. When we were at the other time, we were talking to a list, I think Jody Everson.
Yeah.
They're going to things, there's some questions popping up. And one of them was the assistant, the salary assistants. And there are a variety of people. There's the director, assistant director.
That's right. The exact words from adult education from this list that we received was fully fund assistant director or adult technical education positions for full-time at each tech centers, remove the up to.
Okay.
Because just to remind senators and those watching, we went through on Wednesday, we went through all of the CTE requests. And sort of their list, their brainstorming list, their, hey, how can we help you kind of, response to our questions. And that did come up. Does that make sense to you?
It does. And the language, I mean, we're talking like 16 VSA, 1565 B1C. So it's on page 216. It's what the language is confusing because what it says is that we will fund up to 50% of an assistant director for adult education as long as the general fund meets its obligation. So until I went back and was talking to somebody else, that language made no sense to me. And then what he said was there used to be a grant from the general fund. There's a more, not quite level fund, but more or less level funded over the course of the years. And that's the base of this. And so if that grant, the general fund, plus whatever the ed fund is doing, the two together can fund up to 50% of the average salary. So here's the calculation, simply put. The calculation is you take the full-time assistant directors of adult education, that's called assistant directors, so it's too long for me otherwise. You take the full-time salaries of those who are one FTE.
Of the assistant.
Of the assistant directors. And you take the average for the state. So say there are 8 of them out of the 15, then you take those 8 and find the average. You then take 50% of that, and that's the maximum that the state will fund. So in this case, for this current year, the average is about $114,000. So about the maximum the state will fund would be 50% of that, which would be $57,000 roughly. Okay.
And then we leave it to the. Sorry, please go ahead.
So this is where the confusing language comes in. There's the general fund grant, and what it says is that it goes out in an even amount to every assistant director who's full time that's prorated if they're part time. So they're half time, and that's about it's about $23,300 this year. So what the ed fund does is it matches that because we can't basically what the line is kind of saying we can't go more than what the general fund is doing. So what we're doing between the education fund and the general fund this year is funding about 40% of the average teacher's salary. And I'm not sure, I haven't read that language carefully as to what you're reading, but it sounds like they want to remove the 50% entirely. Maybe it's up to the 50% saying fund at 50%. What that would mean is if they're funding, if we're funding at 50% like we do with directors of the centers and assistant directors and centers, that would increase the draw on the ed fund. Because in the example I gave, if that base grant is about 23.3, and we're going up to 57,000, we're talking about not quite up to $34,000. Okay, currently paying about 23 and half that, so it'd be that difference between there. So it'd be more money out of the ed fund. A huge draw, no, but it would be more money out of the education.
That's helpful.
So because right now we're kind of capped.
Questions?
Did you guys cover, because I wasn't here, I was attending that funeral. Yeah. Did you guys cover like why it's 0.5 of a FTE for an assistant director? And kind of like, what's the, why is there an artificial limitation to
everything? I mean, the directors, the assistant directors, not, and then the assistant directors for the adult education, they're all saying state funds 50%, except up to 50% for the latter. I think why it's 50%, I don't know. It's been that way for a long time, probably before me, but I have to go back to the language.
But that's what they want to remove, correct?
It sounded like they wanted to move it up to 50%. So like they wanted to be adult education.
My notes are over, but that very first.
It sounded like they wanted to go up to 50% instead of, that the state would fund 50% like it does for the directors and such, as opposed to up to, a
So
maximum.
it could be 30, it could be 40, it could be 20.
Right. No, they're saying they're saying two different things. They're saying fully fund the assistant. I'm not sure exactly what they mean. They're saying fully fund. This is 100% when you say fully fund. But then it says remove the up to, which means fully fund at 50%, which I think is probably what Chuck said. Then that would put it in line with the assistant director and the director.
We have Mr. Lucci there. Mr. Lucci, can you tell us what you're hoping for here?
I'm sorry, how much?
Sorry? Rob, this is the we're looking at reviewing the document that you all provided us. And hey, if you don't mind putting up one more copy for Senator, actually a couple more copies so everybody has them for. You all got together, we were trying to, we asked you to give us some ideas of how we can be helpful to CTEs. And we're just trying to figure out this one part under adult tech ed. It says fully fund assistant directors of adult tech ed positions for full-time at tech centers, remove the up to. We just don't know what exactly are you looking for here? But we're getting some mixed messages. Rob?
Sure, with the, I guess I won't get too close. I guess the question is, and maybe because there's someone there who could answer this, why the assistant director of adult education only gets up to 50%, and the directors and assistant directors and other people who get salary assistants get it straight. I heard you talking about the formula and how you calculate that, but I'm just wondering why assistant directors of adult education are treated differently than the other folks who get salary assistance. The director gets 50%, the guidance coordinator gets 50%, work-based learning coordinator gets 35% reimbursement. The assistant director, not of adult education, just the assistant director gets 35%. As long as it's over 150 students. So I'm wondering why the assistant director of adult education is different. Because, many of our positions are part-time. Bill and I are both full-time people, but there's only 4 or 5 people who do this full-time. Most tech centers have this as a very part-time job.
Brad, is there something you can add to that? Or?
Yeah, I'm looking in the amendments in the statute, and this all came into play in 2007. So it was a while ago.
And around the time of, pre-recession. Really.
It was pre-recession, right before 2008.
Yeah.
I think one of the thoughts that somebody said to me who had been here left and subsequently came back, she said to me was the thought was it was too expensive. So that may be why they're doing the. But again, that's anecdotal. I was not part of these conversations at the time, and I probably wouldn't remember what they were having at this point.
That's what I've always heard, is it just was too expensive. So they used the language shall be reimbursed at a rate not to exceed 50%. So, so I think what we were asking is if just we could be reimbursed at a rate just like all the other administrators and staff.
So at 50%.
Well, that would be ideal, but when it comes to up to 50%, well, that can probably vary quite a bit, I would imagine, depending on, especially since there's a small number of full-time assistant directors of adult education. I heard you say you use those of us who are full-time to kind of compute that average. So, that's what we were asking for. And also, like I mentioned, there are very few of us that do this full time. Those of us who are full time by far have the best results for adult technical education in the state. I mean, I think it's 5 of us, but I can't remember. Of the 5 of us who have full-time adult tech ed people, we serve almost 50% of the adult students in the state. So the other centers, the other 10 or 11 or 12 of them serve the other half. So,
I'm gonna put it on the list. We'll get a little note. I'm curious from JFO what this would cost. Send it down to finance, see if they want to do it this year in the miscellaneous tax bill, something like that, just as an option, something.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Senator Sheen.
I didn't want to, sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to mention while we're on the topic, before I forget, if we're going to be doing something, there is a constituent of mine who teaches at CTE in Bradley Grove, former military pilot, has some really great ideas about the licensing process, and he could explain it better than I can, but
CTE licensure to teach.
yes,
Interesting.
he's got some really great ideas, and I'm just making a plug to
Yeah,
have him speak, and it's very to the point, so,
we like that.
yes,
Okay. Great.
sorry.
That's kind of. I don't want to
You'll
interrupt
give,
somebody.
would you give Hayden his name?
Yeah.
And we'll get him in also as we add, because I think some of these things will likely either go on their own bill or part of miscellaneous ed or a tax bill. There were a couple of other outstanding questions after reviewing this yesterday or on Wednesday, and maybe Bill and Rob could help us with them. We were still trying to get to the issue of, it says allow use of Act 77 funds for high school students to enroll in adult technical education to earn an IRC. What's the problem that you're running into? We believe that those funds can go. This might just be that the industries, well, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that.
Okay, when was it last year we met with Mike Marcotte when we initially pitched the idea that that our adult programs like an LNA program, CDL program, a phlebotomy program, that if a kid currently enrolled wanted to access those programs with Act 77 money, they couldn't because it was, I don't know if it was just intended or just assumed that it was only for post-secondary institutions like CCV and Castleton, and that you would be able to use that money as a voucher to take a post-secondary training, but only for classes like that and not our classes. Everybody seemed at the when we were testifying that they were on board with being able to let kids who wanted to get the credentials, some of them that I just mentioned, through Act 77, through the dual enrollment option, that was going to happen. And then somewhere along the line that was derailed, and a bill was introduced for a pilot program through the Department of Labor that allowed kids to take our programs that we thought could go through Act 77, that they would go through this pilot program that was funded by the legislature just for adult CTE programs. But with the codicil being that each tech center only got $20,000 capped for students to enroll in these programs, and that if the center didn't access and use the $20,000, that it couldn't go to the centers who could use it, that money was turned back to the Department of Labor. So, and that's where it stood. So a kid can walk into the guidance office at their high school, like Rutland High School, and say, I want to go to psych or intro to medical terminology at CCV, and they can take it. But that same kid can't walk in and say, I want to take the LNA program at night through Stafford and use Act 77 money to do that.
Any reaction to that, Mr. James? This is the final thing we're going to talk about.
I understand what he's saying. This is not my area of expertise, but I do remember that Beth St. James brought up Section 1593 the other day. And that's where it's students and post-secondary students and post-secondary per technical education programs. But I think that's what it's talking about,
Yeah.
post-secondary. And it does say that it can be at the expense of the district if the enrollment is accepted by the post-secondary career institution and approved by the district of residence. So I don't know if that means technically Act 77 money, which is flexible pathways, or if it's just a cost to the school district, but the school district can apparently pay for it, as I quickly read the statute.
That might have been that's the point. Bill and Rob, just because of the schedule this afternoon, we just wanted to have that little additional conversation with you. I'll check up on those two things, but frankly, I think this is going to be, if one of you are willing, a Monday meeting here with me and Ledge Council, just to make sure we're all on the same page. I can get some answers for committee members and maybe structure again some kind of bill. I think there's still just a lot of outstanding questions from our lawyers based on this 2-page doc that you guys provided us with. So I think that's what I'm going to do. If you and be in touch, we'll have Hayden set something up on an upcoming Monday with 1 or 2 of you over Zoom with our lawyer, Beth St. James, in the room, just so we can get some of these questions answered. Otherwise, we'll be here forever. Sound good?
That'd be terrific.
Great. Thank you.
That sounds great.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. St. James, yes, please.
I was
Yeah.
gonna one thing that we were talking about when you talk about finance, JFO.
Yeah.
The fiscal note. Basically what will happen if this change were to happen, if the edge fund was to pick up that money up to 50%, so call it $12,000 for full time for this year. If that would come out of the district's budget, so it'd be a slight impact of the tax rate come off the top of the ed fund. If you go into another line. It's essentially finance of what would happen. Okay, in terms of reality. It's not, as I said, it's not huge money.
Right. Well,
That's
I want to do something, and partly this might have to be looked at a little bit more deeply, but if I can, come in on a Monday and meet with a couple of folks and have Beth there, and if you want, whatever, just to hammer this out so I can bring something to the committee that makes sense rather than sort of this.
No, I'll be happy to answer.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you. St. James.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So we have two items before us. S-134. Sorry. Just tell me what this. Oh, you're using this for your testimony?
I'm sorry.
Hayden said you're using this document?
Oh, yes, this is out of the big bill, the language we talked about yesterday.
Yes, okay.
Rather
Yes.
than give you over 200 pages, I thought,
Yes.
cut and paste.
So we have two things before us with regard to S-134. Actually, no, we don't just have this one follow-up. Sorry, just this one follow-up as it relates to S-134. Let me just bring senators back to Senator Weeks's question around having a look at the acts and, gosh, it must have been, what year was this, 2021?
And then it was amended. What you have is an amalgamation of what was amended last year and the original language. in
Right.
2021.
And so what the question, and I'll just phrase it and Senator Weeks will correct me, is we were trying to get a sense of what are the report backs? What are the expectations? What did we say as a legislature to the state colleges to do? We know we said cut, and we also said give us some feedback. And I thought Senator Weeks made a good point when he said, well, let's take a look at some of this language and see if there's something in here that we need to know or could adjust if need be. So does that make sense? Does that
Yes.
sort of- okay. Please.
Great, Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. So what I've done is the directive, I'm calling it the financial stability language. The directive from the General Assembly originally came in the big bill, the budget in 2021. You'll see it's on line 3 there, 2021 action resolves number 74 and then section E 602.2. And then it was amended by Act 185 from last year, which is last year's budget. So the language you have in front of you, anything that's underlined was going to be added, was added last year.
Okay.
Or any strikeouts were strikeouts from last year. And if it's not underlined, it's the original language from 2021. So the first thing I want to say is, as I was kind of looking at this for the first time in committee with you all yesterday, I was saying, well, or was it Wednesday? Wednesday. Well, there is some report back, information in here. And as I actually took a closer read of it, that's accurate. But the information that, and we can walk through this, I just want to start with this. The information that they are required to provide to the General Assembly through this process is the language used is it's the requiring BSC to report that information in their annual budget presentation. So it doesn't require a report back requirement like you all are used to. When you say, go study this, bring us back a written report, we can go look right on the website in the report section and find it. So the information they are required to get to the General Assembly. If you all don't have your hands on it right now, we'll have to brainstorm and figure out how to get your hands on it. Because it sounds like it should have come through their budget presentation, and I don't know who receives or received that budget presentation. Whether it's a bunch of different committees, just appropriations, et cetera, or whether there were any written materials.
Senator Williams.
Didn't they say it was on the website? Because I asked about that. As the wages for the administration, they said public information.
All of that, yeah.
Yeah.
This is specifically what they would have presented.
Yeah, let's just walk through it.
Yeah,
Maybe
okay.
I shouldn't have started that way. I just wanted to
All right.
correct
No,
myself
no,
today.
it's both good questions.
So you will see here on line 5, this is kind of the first directive here in subsection A. The state college system shall transform itself into a fully integrated system that achieves financial stability in a responsible and sustainable way in order to meet each of these strategic priorities. So that's kind of the overarching directive. And so then there's several categories of areas. So affordability, they are required to ensure that student costs and debt obligations are not barriers to student access. Accessibility, ensure that each BSC student, regardless of where the student's home campus is located, has increased access to academic opportunities, majors, and courses across the statewide system. Equitability, determine the extent to which gaps in educational access and success are being reduced for students from economically deprived backgrounds, first-generation students, students of color, and other marginalized groups. Relevance, ensure that each BSC student is prepared for a lifelong career and personal success in a globally competitive 21st century. Ensure that BSC offers educational programs that are aligned with state workforce needs, offered in a fiscally responsible manner, and delivered in a manner that is relevant to current student and employer needs. BSC shall meet the following, okay, so that's what they should be looking at when they're looking at their becoming a financial and achieving financial stability. Then the next directive is they have to meet the following requirements during the transformation of its system required under subsection A that we just walked through, and accommodate the oversight of the General Assembly. So I don't know how you get much more specific in your oversight of what's happening here than that language.
Repeat that.
Sure. So on the top of the second page,
Yeah.
It says BSC shall meet the following requirements during the transformation of its system and shall accommodate the oversight of the General Assembly in doing so. So here on line 4 on page 2, this is where that $5 million over the next 5 years comes from. So BSC shall reduce its structural deficit by $5 million per year through a combination of annual operating expense reductions and increased enrollment revenues for a total of $25 million by the end of fiscal year 2026. These reductions shall be structural in nature and shall not be met by use of one-time funds. The BSC Board of Trustees, through the Chancellor or designee, shall report the results of these structural reductions to the House and Senate Committees on Education and on Appropriations annually during the Chancellor's budget presentation. So that's the first report back language, and you'll notice it's during the budget presentation.
Okay, so we could based on this, one would think the House would have heard this, given the budget processes already gone through the House, and now we would be getting teed up, or they'd be teeing themselves up to come in before this committee and send reports.
Yes, I think that is a reasonable interpretation of the timeline.
So when was the last budget?
I don't know that. That's why I was saying we'll have to brainstorm how to get your hands on that information.
Well, we're getting it, but we're not getting it formally through. Maybe we haven't asked for a copy of it. So we're getting it from faculty. So you may have seen this morning, forwarded an email to you guys.
Yeah.
So there has been a budget a budget presentation that's gone through that has these details in it. We just need to figure out.
Right. So I think that, so the budget starts in the House. So presumably some committee in the House
Yeah.
has heard this. So that's why whether
Well, I'm talking about last year, not reacting to where we are right now, but just in the normal cycle, last year's budget should have already come out.
correct.
And Beth said that we need to dig into that, try to find out where that is.
When you don't work,
Yeah.
when you don't
Catherine might
require,
have it.
sorry, I'm
Sorry,
sorry.
I know.
When you don't require, and I didn't draft this language, and so I'm not commenting on the drafting of this language, I'm just commenting kind of on the legislative process. When you don't say, shall issue a written report to, you're kind of opening yourselves up for getting that information in any way.
Yeah.
That you are, the person holding or the entity holding that information and wants to give it to you.
So,
Now, I think this is clear that it's during their budget presentation.
but it doesn't need to be a written report.
It doesn't say written.
So that's just, again, I'm not interested in becoming a super trustee of the university system personally. The state colleges, state trustees are there. But we could do something like make sure the report is a written report or get some kind of more formal check. Just an idea if we want to tighten the screws a little bit.
Absolutely.
That's not a right thing to say necessarily.
So did this committee have input into this language?
It's a good question. It would have come in 2020 or was it
20, so this, the 2021 was this, when this began.
Right, so
that
it would have
Jim.
been, I would have been on finance then.
So it's Senator Bruce's fault.
Well, if you want to say that, if Jigger's watching, I think Jigger's watching, for the headline. No, yeah, I think, but I suspect there might have been, or frankly, it could have just been done in appropriations or, yeah.
I think lots of language
Lots of-
appears in the budget.
Who
so-
knows, we could have them in and they could say, Brian, you wrote this,
So have we talked to the trustees?
The only trustees I've had any contact with is our legislative trustee, one of them, when she came in, the chair, this was maybe about 3 months ago when we were just kicking things off, rep from Franklin County,
Bingo?
who's the rep from Franklin County, the state, she's the chair of the state board, Lee Dickinson. Yeah, okay, please go ahead.
So that's the first bucket of information that they are required to report back on. The second bucket of information is starts on line 11 there. That the trustees shall develop and implement a 10-year strategic plan for managing physical assets that is fiscally sustainable, maintains reasonable net asset value, and meets the needs of Vermont learners. Updates to the plan and an annual report on its implementation shall be presented to the House Committee on Corrections and Institutions and the Senate Committee on Institutions. So again, I don't see the word written in there, and those are, different committees. So it's possible that those committees have written testimony. It's also possible that they just received oral testimony.
And this is somewhere, if we wanted to, we could add for the future.
Yes,
Yep.
yes,
So just
absolutely.
another little tweak if we want to move in this direction.
Absolutely. Line 17, BSC shall maintain its present campus locations as educational and student support centers, recognizing the overall campus size, governance, and operational structures, as well as program and service offerings may change as circumstances require. And then on line 20, beginning in fiscal year 2022 and through 2031, the VSC Board of Trustees acting through the Chancellor or designee shall brief as part of the Chancellor's annual budget proposal, the House and Senate Committees on Education and Committees on Appropriation. And again, before we go on to what they have to brief, again, they're using that term brief during the budget proposal. Doesn't guarantee that there's written information on that out there. So if you go to the next page 3, and I'm realizing now I didn't put page numbers on this, my apologies. Line 1, subdivision A, so they have to brief during their budget presentation about give information on enrollment levels in courses, and then it splits out different levels of information. So basis of courses with fewer than 5 students, courses with 5 to 9, courses with 10 to 14, and courses with 15 or more, along with relevant info about enrollment data. In order to demonstrate accessibility, the percentage of courses and programs offered by VSC on a statewide basis and on the formats in which they are offered. Assessment on affordability and accessibility and how to recommendations on how to improve them. Retention statistics with corresponding trends lines and benchmarks. Enrollment statistics with methods of comparison, using readily available metrics that pertain to student enrollment efforts authorized by the current fiscal year Vermont budget bill, with the net student revenue generated and discount rate applied in order to enroll the students, aggregated by cohort. Demographics aggregated by full and part-time students. So that's the information that they need to get to during their budget presentation, or part of the information. And then on line 17, to help optimize student opportunities, VSC shall complete implementation of seamless general education credit transfer between all of its constituent institutions by the end of fiscal year 2023. To ensure that VSC is meeting its responsibilities to Vermont businesses and communities, beginning in fiscal year 2022, the Board of Trustees, through the Chancellor or designee, shall report again to the House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development and the Senate Committee on Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs as part of the Chancellor's annual budget presentation on advances in workforce readiness and meeting employer needs, including employer and institutional partnerships, progress in meeting critical employer needs, and the number of degrees and credentials of value awarded.
Line 4, what is a critical employer need in this?
That is not defined in here, and my area of expertise is not in workforce development. So you'll see that this information is aimed at the Commerce Committees. So it's potential that that term will have more meaning to them than I'm able to articulate now, but it's relatively subjective.
Usually the Department of Labor puts out a list pretty regularly of, this could be shortages, needs in the state. And I think there might be some connection between those two things, possibly siblings.
So I'm trying to think back, this session that the Chancellor and the President came in and briefed us, but I don't remember specifically getting this information.
No, I agree.
And then I know when we asked them to come in after all this started, institutions pulled them in too, because they had not been.
Right, and we had them in also right after the announcement. You may recall we had the Chancellor and President in over Zoom.
The next piece they are required to provide on line 6, subdivision 7, the trustees through the Chancellor in a summary form has to provide to the House and Senate Committees on Education and the House and Senate Committees on Approach a part of the Chancellor's, as part of the Chancellor's annual budget presentation, the profit and loss statement based on its annual October financial statement. The Chancellor shall ensure all VSC Board of Trustees policies are adhered to unless a process for an exception to a board policy is used to situationally and temporarily amend a specific board policy. The Chancellor shall establish policies and procedures to implement the board-approved transformation plan as developed by the Select Committee on Higher Education. The Chancellor shall report the status or progress of these board policies as part of the Chancellor's annual budget presentation to the House and Senate Committees on Education. The Chancellor shall report by institution overall net student revenue and institutional discounting of tuition metrics. And then regarding the deficit reduction plan, which is at 5 million, 25 million by 2026. The Chancellor shall report the activities that have generated expense cuts and activities that will result in enhanced revenues, as well as future plans that will continue both efforts. Chancellor, on behalf of the college system, shall offer methods of comparison using readily available metrics in order to provide relevant information to help the General Assembly carry out its oversight role. So in this, when we're talking about this financial stability piece and the legislative oversight and the report back requirements and kind of this umbrella, this overlook, that's what's required of them right now.
Can we simply request the legislative representative on the BSC Board of Trustees to provide a copy of fiscal year 22 execution summary and fiscal year 23 plan? Isn't that what we're
Like our trustee, you know.
Yeah. You know, they have the nice position, but now we need to exercise.
They are
They are.
Yeah, and that would be, can you find out who those trustees are? I know one of them is Lynn Dickinson, but there's a hand, there are a few others. And then Senator Weeks will just give you the language and you would just ask it of them. That would be great. Yeah.
There's no specific date when these budget briefings are supposed to be done. You would think that it would be in the normal budget cycle, you know, particularly if they're coming in looking for something they need or something they're not gonna be able to meet, so that the big bill can have that included if they have to.
Yeah, and my interpretation of this, and I may be wrong, is in the language, I don't know if it says it directly, but it seems like there's a connection showing this, giving this report around the time that the budget is being reviewed, but we could always put a date in there. So I just don't, and again, the committee may completely disagree, and that's fine. I think there may be more cuts coming. Well, we know that there are more cuts coming if they're gonna really reach their $5 million goal. We could have this every single time. Every time there's a cut, we could have these kinds of discussions and this kind of debate. I realize that this is the first big cut, I think, that's come. And I would just say, I like the idea of, let's get here from our legislative trustees a little bit. Let's also, I guess the other thing I would say is if we put our hand into this, we are probably the first time really jumping into a state university situation. And we do kind of start to become a little bit like super trustees, and that could impact, you know, the future of the institution. Do you want to come? Do you want to move your family somewhere where take a new job? If the legislature is going to put its hand in UVM and the state colleges, it's just, you know, it's just a question. We could all, no matter what, at the very least, we could start to put some more different requirements in there in writing and saying we need these reports and we want them for. So I just sort of saying my piece a little bit on it. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I agree with the idea, but with this, at least from where I'm sitting watching all this, you know, from my perspective, a lot of the problem had to do with the rollout of how this happened. And I mean, I don't like speculating, but I'm going to speculate. I would suspect that if this happened in a much different way with a lot more transparency and input from students and happened a little bit slower, I suspect that, you know, at least part of it would go through without much of an issue. And you know, at least for me, you know, when I hear so many students and so many staff and faculty in an uproar about this, it compels me to have to act in some way. That's part of my responsibility as a legislator. So, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah.
I don't think any one of us would be involved in this issue if the full plan was disclosed and how they achieved their 5 million deficit target, and it was communicated properly. I think we would simply watch it.
We didn't tell them they had to do that. They basically said, go
No, I'm
forth,
not saying that they
go
had,
forth
no,
and do this.
I wouldn't say they have to or didn't have to, because we didn't tell them,
That's
there was
what
no
I'm saying.
guidance.
Right.
Point is that here's one element of a bigger deficit challenge, how they reacted to that challenge. And to Senator Campion's point, there's 4.5 million more to go. Plus there's next year and the year, et cetera. And I agree with you that it, wasn't handled well, but we're at a point now where they can handle it much better because they've seen, the negative reaction. If they want to get themselves, into a better place, they need a lot more communication and anyway, so I think that there's a lot of lessons learned here. And again, they're under a mandate not created by this committee specifically, but a past generation of this committee. And to Senator Campion's point, I don't want to be a super trustee, but I certainly want to help them improve how they deal with this particular issue and the remaining money for this fiscal year and next fiscal year, et cetera.
Senator Williams.
No, if I were the chancellor, knowing what this says, I'd say, hey, we're good to go. And they were until they took something away that somebody didn't want them to. So there's no flexibility for coming back and saying, well, we didn't mean that. Because we need to tell them somehow that if they do something, even though they're meeting the financial requirements, that we told them to, if they do something that they need to have a different way of doing it than what they did.
And how they rolled this. So,
Correct.
they
And
completely
that
shot
language
themselves
is not
the foot,
in
yeah.
what they were told to do.
Yeah.
And I mean, I can't blame them because just reading that is pretty vague.
Yeah.
I don't think, because of this good read through,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
I don't think they've done anything inappropriate.
No,
Inappropriate in trying to meet their target, besides poor communication. But there's, again, this is what, 1/10 of their target. We've got 9/10 more to go, which have to be handled, with a lot more finesse, professionalism finesse.
so can we go back and amend what we told them?
We always can do that. We are going to hear, we were asked by the unions to have some folks come in. We gave 30 minutes. Tom, can you give us an update on that?
In what regard, Mr.
Well,
Chairman?
how many people are you having come in and tell us a little bit about the plan? Identify yourself.
Yes, of course. For the record, my name is Tom Abdelmar. I'm the legislative coordinator for the Vermont State Employees Association. Mr. Chairman, we are in communication with our members about the testimony next week. My understanding, and I can't certainly speak on behalf of our sister union, AFT. My understanding, though, is that in their case, Heather Reamer, their executive director, is expected to testify on their behalf. That's my understanding.
Okay.
And as a result, at the moment, my understanding is that we anticipate our testimony would be from either myself or one of the other colleagues on our staff legislative team next week. If that should change, I'll certainly be in touch with the committee immediately.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And here's a list of trustees, just so you know. Oh, can we get some copies of this? Sure. Just pass it around or just hold, that's for you. The highlighted ones are legislative, either current or past legislators, but they're still on there. Okay, gives us some things to think about. This is very helpful.
Sure, well, I
Yeah,
didn't write
that's a
it.
good suggestion by
So I
Senator
can't take any
Weeks.
credit.
What's that?
I said I didn't write this. I
No,
can't
but it was a
take
good
any credit.
suggestion, Senator Weeks. I think it helps us. Okay. Any other final questions for Ms. St. James on this topic before we take a look at Senator Hashim's amendment? I don't think you have copies. I have copies.
I did not write that.
There we go. Okay, Senator Hashim.
Yeah, so really just a incident of me having a perspective, getting new evidence and persuasive evidence that caused me to change my perspective, and so placed or added onto agriculture and recreation and also included or other reasonably practical purposes directly related to the school's mission or curriculum. By the way, this also involves section 3 in the school safety bill. I probably should start with that. The section related to locks. This largely comes from a school in my district that has probably around a dozen buildings, and their unique curriculum. Students are moving in and around these buildings throughout the day, and it really wouldn't be reasonably practical. And I'm sure this could also apply to other schools in Vermont that might have similar heavy focuses on outdoor or agricultural curriculum. So that's the amendment.
Good to go.
Senator Williams, do you have any concerns? St. James, are we doing anything here that is, anyway, I don't have the copy of my bill right here. Oh, no, I've got that. I just was looking at I don't have it right here to do it. So we're just, again, saying, just as this says, agriculture, recreational purposes, recreational or other reasonably practical purposes related to the curriculum, et cetera. So this is just, you've got 10 buildings, going to have flexibility based on your visitor management policy.
Yeah, I mean, this is a policy choice for you all.
No, I understand that, but you know the bill the best. I want to make sure we've got nothing contradictory in the bill, anything like that.
So I would not say that it's contradictory. It is going to be a policy decision for you all on how tight of a control you want to have over what those visitor policies have to say, or that, so the section 3 is called access control and visitor management policy. So the first part of that section says you gotta lock all exterior doors during the school day, period. And it said nothing about any exceptions to that in the original language. And then we added language that says if a school recognizes the need to leave a specific structure unlocked as needed for agricultural or recreational purposes, may justify leaving that structure unlocked in its visitor policy. We've expanded that a little bit to say or other reasonably practical purposes, qualified that by saying related to mission or curriculum. And so if you all are comfortable with how broad that is, or how different that is from where you started, which was just blocks, period, understanding that this would apply to every school. Great, it's a policy choice.
Okay.
Can I back up just one step?
Yeah.
2 steps. So the whole security plan ultimately goes to the school board for approval, isn't that? So then go to
It's the supervisor.
Supervisory union.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Mr. James, no, please jump in.
So it's this, in general, in Vermont, it's the school board's responsibility to develop these policies. And they have it, that's one of their charges under state law. And there's actually a little bit of language about how they have to develop those policies and the input they have to have, the notice they have to give, et cetera. This also requires supervisory union boards to also have policies because it's required, I believe it's because it's also requiring district offices to have these policies. So it would be on both levels, the SU policy for their district offices and then the school board for the schools that they're managing.
So I just want to make one point that I think this gives the school board the flexibility, school boards at various levels, the flexibility they need to make decisions on their own, and they have their fingerprints on it. That's the most important thing. If we give them guidelines, they tailor them to their specific school. That's the whole point of the bill.
Yeah,
But they're not really guidelines. though. I mean, we're told what they gotta do.
We
As
are,
reasonably
but-
practical. As reasonably practical.
Right.
right,
You know,
and
it's-
that's about as good as you can get.
Yeah, I mean, I think my thing also is just remembering, these folks who work in schools, whether they're independent or public, they're gonna wanna make sure their kids are safe,
If they decide to leave the barn open.
Right.
For practical purposes, okay, but it's a conscious decision.
Yeah.
And that if God forbid something bad happens, at least they said, okay, look, we had the opportunity, we tried to think it through, but that was the best we could think of at the time.
If it's homecoming weekend somewhere or whatever. you
That
know.
barn better be locked.
No, right, yeah. I see it looks like this will leave with the committee's support. You bring it to, who's the person that is,
I think you coordinate this with the secretary's office at
Okay.
this point.
Secretary Bloomer's
So
office.
we have to take an official vote, or how does that work?
You want to do one absent?
Really are.
I know, I'm serious. That's
Yeah.
my last day. It'll be sitting here on Tuesday. Let's be honest. So this is Senator Hashim's amendment to S-138, draft 1.1. Do I see a motion to approve this?
So moved.
Second,
Okay, and seconded. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Is it 401?
Yeah.
Thank you. The one absent.
That was easy.
Generally.
Didn't want to say the names, is that were you looking forward to?
no, nobody asked for a roll
Took the
call.
wind out of the sails.
Yeah, you seem excited to say the
I'm a
names.
little slow.
With my Senator Mazza hat on, floor culture, which we've never really talked about as a new group of senators up there. And I think we're getting in trouble a little bit because we haven't talked about it, maybe. We don't, I know you guys voted against it. We don't normally question as committee members or speak out publicly against bills when we're on the committee, generally. There's.
You know, on the floor.
On the floor, yeah. So historically, that has been the
You had your
case
chance to grill me today on this wing, Mr. I'm just saying.
on miscellaneous. No, generally, I mean, if you're on health, whatever committee, if you're sometimes, thinking of something in my morning committee on a bill where it might be 4-1 without me. If it was one of those things where I could go to Bobby and say, hey, I really need to get up and say my piece if it were whatever, but generally, when it's the committee, just historically, you guys can do whatever you want. That's how we have been.
Just one request.
But
You're gonna report this?
Yeah.
Can you keep it to 15 minutes?
Oh, yeah.
All right, now I want to hear
I
from you.
try to keep, my miscellaneous bill is 10 minutes, I think.
No, I think that there could be a productive culture in presenting the dissenting opinion, just like the Supreme Court does. We learn a lot from learning about why somebody voted against it. And what did they, the bill is complicated. Why did they support this bit and why didn't you support that bit? And get the others thinking that, it may be completely unsuccessful, but I think the culture of dissent is part of democracy.
Yeah, no, yeah, I agree.
But I'm not gonna do anything.
Yeah, no, I'm just sort of, that could be something that we could sort of talk about as a body. It just, yeah.
I
Please.
know, I haven't heard in the Senate, but I've seen it in the House, where somebody, they asked for a roll call vote,